Hi, I'm Jennifer Bearden with the University of Florida Office Extension in Okaloosa County. I'm here today on a beautiful piece of property where I've established a wildlife food plot demonstration. And what I want to do is go over the key steps to successfully establishing a wildlife food plot, as well as looking at some of the great cool season forages that work well here. So the first step to great food plots is in the soil. So we have to know what kind of soil do we have. Is it sandy soil, loamy soil? Is it well drained or poorly drained? So that's our first step. That's going to help us identify what kind of plants are going to do well for us in our food plots. The next step is actually pulling a soil sample and sending it off so that we know what the pH is and what the soil nutrient levels already are, so that we can then manage the food plots. The next step is plant selection. We have a wide variety of cool season forages that do very well in our wildlife food plots. We have clovers, mini clovers that do well for us. We have several grasses that do well for us, as well as brassicas that perform well for us. Personally, I like to use mixtures of plants. So I like to select several plants that I think that the animals might enjoy and mix those together and plant those. So doing this can extend the amount of time that forages are available for the animals. So say oats come on earlier in the year, and then things like crimson clover will come on later in the year, so that extends the amount of time that these forages are available to the animals. As well as kind of catering to their palatability. So I select several plants that I think they might enjoy eating, because the whole point is to attract them to the plot area. And so I select several plants that I think they might enjoy eating to mix those together, as well as say conditions aren't right for one plant to grow this year. I won't have total crop failure because those other plants that I mixed in can kind of fill the void of the one plant that just didn't have the right conditions to make it. So it kind of mitigates the risk of total failure of your food plot as well. So site selection is important. You want the food plot to have plenty of sunlight, but you do want cover plants nearby to make the animals feel comfortable walking into the food plot. You also want to place a food plot close to water sources and bedding areas so that they don't have to travel far to get their food. Now, cool season food plots are going to be a little bit smaller than warm season food plots. Warm season food plots are meant to provide nutrition to the animal, whereas cool season food plots are just meant to attract the animals into an area. 1/4 acre to about an acre is sufficient for cool season food plots. Now, you do want to try to have them in irregular shapes and follow the contours of tree lines if at all possible. This will make them feel a little more comfortable coming into the food plot areas. And as we know, the food plots are just meant to attract the animals into the area during our hunting season. Now let's take a walk through the food plot and look at all the different forages that we have planted there. So our first forage that we'll look at is our Dixie crimson clover. This is a very versatile clover. It'll grow in lots of different soil types and different soil conditions. It's probably the most forgiving on pH as well. It is a great tasting, very palatable to the animal, and one of my favorites to put in a food plot. So our next forage we'll look at is our Southern Belle red clover, another versatile little clover, very palatable for the deer. A lot of wildlife enthusiasts like to plant it. It is a nice growing clover. We'll zoom in here where you can see it growing there. You can see actually from the exclusion cage that the deer are enjoying eating it. Next up is our Ocoee white clover. Nice little clover. Once again, you can see that from the exclusion cage that the deer are enjoying eating this as well. I think they're enjoying eating all the clover out here. But Ocoee white clover, a great clover for our area. Next up is the Black Hawk Arrowleaf Clover. Arrowleaf clover gets a lot of growth on it. I like it for that fact. It grows a good tall plant. The deer enjoy eating it, as you can see from how high above the ground level that the deer have eaten it down. So you can see in the exclusion cage how high it would be if they hadn't eaten it down. So this is the Black Hawk Arrowleaf Clover. All right, our next clover and last clover is our Dawnball Clover. This is a clover that was developed by Dr. Dawnball at Auburn University. Great clover. The deer are enjoying eating it as well. In fact, they've eaten a lot of it just slapped to the ground. That's what normally would be here if they hadn't eaten what's around it here. So the Dawnball Clover. And here's another Auburn legume. This is the AU Merit Hairy Vetch. So this is our vetch that's growing here. You can see it growing up the side of the exclusion cage there. Hairy vetch. Now here's another legume that the deer really are enjoying eating. This is our Austrian winter peas. On the outside of the exclusion cage, their plants are about 2 inches tall, and inside it you can see it's over a foot tall. So the Austrian winter pea is a hit with the deer out here. So it's a good legume to throw into a mixture. So here's our purple top turnip plot, and we had a problem with it in that the deer were eating it, but so were caterpillars, and so we had heavy caterpillar feeding on the purple top turnips. I think that's just because people plant a lot of winter greens in our area, and so there's just higher pest levels that are looking for our brassicas out here. And here we have our trophy rape. A similar problem that we had with the purple top turnips. We did have some caterpillar feeding on it, but it seemed to do better than the purple top turnip at escaping that feeding. However, it didn't escape the deer feeding. They did feed on it and seemed to enjoy it. And here we have our chicory. Chicory has been pretty heavily fed on by the deer. They have enjoyed it. They've kept it mowed down. So the deer do enjoy having some chicory mixed in. I wouldn't plant an entire plot in chicory, but mixing it with other grasses and legumes is a great idea. And here we have our 4-way blend. So it's a grass with legumes mixed in with it. And we've got different clovers mixed in here with the grass. This, if you can see here, has pretty heavy deer feeding on the plot. The deer have really enjoyed these mixtures. So here we have our 6-way blend. This blend has grasses, several legumes, different clovers, peas in it. Just a good variety that the deer definitely are enjoying. We get a lot of growth out of it, as you can see there in the exclusion cage. How much forage is actually inside the exclusion cage versus how much forage is outside the exclusion cage here. So you see the difference there of what the deer are eating of this blend and what's growing. And I will say that it's very important to put exclusion cages in for just this purpose. People will call me and say, my food plot just isn't growing. What you told me to plant just isn't growing. And my question is it not growing, or are the deer eating all that's growing? And just seeing what's out here outside of the exclusion cage, I would think, maybe it's not performing very well. But when you compare it to what's inside that exclusion cage, you see that it is performing very well. the deer just are enjoying it very well. So here we have Triticale 342 Triticale. This is one of my favorite grasses to use in a food plot. Although I like to mix it with some oats, so it extends kind of the growing season because it'll come out a little later in the year than the oats do. And here we are at the buck forage oats. This is probably one of my favorite oats to put in, and definitely is a favorite of the deer, as you can see. They love it as well. So this is our buck forage oats plot, and they've really kind of ate that down to the ground. I like to mix the oats in with a little triticale, kind of extend the growing season there. Oats will come on early, whereas triticale will come on later. And then I love to throw in some clovers and some things like daikon radish to kind of even it out and give the deer a good choice of things to munch on. So the steps I used to establish this demonstration plot were very simple. I used a small tractor and a small disc to disc the area, and then used a push broadcast spreader to spread the seed. I went over it with a drag and then ran over the area well with the tractor to establish a good firm seed bed for the seed to be able to germinate in. I did not have to adjust the soil pH because it was a 6.3 when we started, so I didn't have to do that. I planted it November 4th, 2020, which was a timely planting for our area. I came back in January and put out fertilizer and put out the exclusion cages then. They had already been feeding very heavily on the food plot, so the exclusion cages would show a more drastic difference if I had put them in November. But I allowed the deer to kind of forage on them while it established throughout the season. But the food plot was very successful. I did not use any herbicide burn down or any other herbicide treatments in the food plot area. We relied on the disking to control most of our weeds. We do have some winter weeds that are here in the food plot, but they have not been a problem for us. There is still adequate forage here for the deer. So thank you for joining me and walking through my demonstration plot with me, and hopefully in the summer I'll have some warm season forages to show you.